Hey guys, Rob here at 3D Printscape. Today I'm going to talk about Cura Infill patterns, some of the differences between them, really the four categories that they belong in, and show you examples. I have some printed here, then I'm also going to jump over to Cura, kind of talk about a couple of things there as well. I want to make sure I go over this in a little bit more detail. I did a video on this in the past. It wasn't the best. The camera angles were pretty bad, so I wanted to kind of redo it, getting better images on the actual prints themselves, and going into more details along with bringing in some of the aspects in Cura that I wanted to cover that I did not in that video. That was a quick video. Alright, so let's go and get started. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on this pile of prints I have here, kind of break them into four categories, and then talk about them a little bit, and then we'll jump over to Cura. Before we do that, make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe. It'll really help this channel grow. Thanks. Alright guys, what I did was I printed out pretty much a coaster using each of the infill patterns available in Cura. I took the top layer off, so in the actual Cura settings I set the top layers to 0 instead of the default. That way it leaves the infill exposed. So this is what it would look like if it was fully printed, just basically a coaster. Which actually, I don't like the coaster like this. I like it better with the patterns exposed. If I was using it for that, it just gives it more texture and more of a personality, I guess. Alright, so let's go and get started. We've got four separate categories of strength here. We've got low, normal, high, and flexible, which is equivalent to a low. Alright, so let's go and pull in the lows here. Here we have line and zigzag. I'm sure on the camera right now you won't be able to see the difference because looking at it up close you can barely see the difference, if at all. I will show you the difference in Cura. It's basically just changing the lines, the way the lines are created, going back and forth. One of them just does a straight cut, one kind of curves around a little bit, but I'll show you that in Cura. We can get a little bit more closer view of it there. One thing to point out is you would think because these are lower strength that they would be quicker to print, and that's not always the case. I have a chart I'm going to show you here in a couple minutes when we get over to the computer, but you'll see that that's definitely not the case. Low strength ones tend to take a little bit longer in most cases, or be right on average, and then the concentric or the flexible one is the quickest print, and then one of the longest prints is also in the flexible category as well. So that has the widest range of print time in any category. Alright, so this is our low strength. Let's go ahead and go to standard strength. Here we've got grid, which used to be the one that I printed all the time. I don't do that anymore, which I'll talk about here in a bit as well. We got triangle and then tri-hex. So grid, if you look at it versus like line or zigzag, they look the same on the pattern itself. The difference is really with grid, it's the same pattern being built up on every layer, where with line and zigzag it's kind of shifting between layers, so it's not as strong. And then your triangle is just that, it's a bunch of triangles here. Again, it's printed the same way all the way up, and then same with the tri-hex. As you would guess, it's a mixture of triangles and hexagons, but it's built with the same pattern all the way up. It doesn't shift layers and move around at all. These can still take longer to print than some of the high strength ones and use the same filament. So like I said, I used to use grid a lot just because I think at one point in time Cura defaulted to it. That's not the case anymore, but it was what I thought was just a standard print. And it kind of is, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be quicker or better than some of the other ones. Alright, so let's go ahead and push these out of the way for a second here. Alright, so here are our high strength prints. We have our cubic offsets, and then we have gyroid, which personally I think looks the coolest if you're doing any type of print where you're exposing the infill, or if you're doing any type of time-lapse videos. I like this one the best. As you can see, the pattern here is just really neat. I'll show you it again in Cura. You can see it a little bit better. And then you have the Octa. All of these are considered high strength. I believe that The standard cubic one here is the default now in Cura, which again I'll show you when we get over to the computer. It actually takes less time to print than our standard grid here, and is technically stronger. So I've been kind of shifting most of my day-to-day prints to this pattern. It looks cool as well, not as cool as the Gyroid, but I guess it depends what you're doing. Gyroid does take a lot longer to print and uses more filament. I haven't really gone back and forth between the cubic subdivision and our quarter cubic here. I haven't really had the need. It doesn't buy too much in my opinion. I kind of just have a couple that I stick to, and that's that. But they are options. So if you use those, I'll be curious to know when and why. Love to have a conversation on that. And then same with Octa, I just don't really use it, but it does look kind of neat. We'll go over the print times here in a minute, and then like I said, Gyroid, it looks the coolest to me, especially if you're doing like time-lapse videos or trying to show off your printer or anything like that. Alright, so that's our high strength group. Let's go ahead and take a look at the flexible. Alright, so here's flexible. There's 3 of them in this category. Now again, I typically never use any of these for standard prints or with PLA, except for with this example because I'm trying to show you just as a reference. So concentric here, it follows the perimeter of the outside. So if you got mixed shapes, it will kind of follow what it is, but it doesn't really touch. So if you have a flexible filament, it just makes it easy to twist. I got some little popping here, but if this was a lower infill or something, you can see that it's pretty flexible compared to like this. It's I guess the filament will have a difference on it as well. This PLA isn't really flexible, but you can bend this a lot more without it breaking, I guess, which is the key. The snapping you're hearing is from this line here. Once those pop, you typically won't hear that anymore. But if you see pictures of wrenches and stuff that are printed online that people are kind of bending, those were printed with concentric fills. Alright, and then you also, one other thing on this is the quickest print time. It's following the perimeter, so it's able to actually lay down the filament much quicker. So I guess that's kind of neat if you're trying to do something like that or worried about print times. Now the Cross and Cross 3D here, they're also flexible. As you can see, there's pretty much straight lines all the way across where things can bend without it popping or cracking. The actual bottom on this is pretty strong, so it's not very flexible in general, but if you were to want to print something that is flexible, these are also options. Now personally, I would not use either one of these. If I was printing something I needed to be flexible, I would probably go with this unless I had a specific need, and I never had a need to use either one of these. They look cool, but they don't really have much of a benefit. And I think the Cross 3D, which I'll have to verify when I look at my sheet again here in a couple minutes, is the slowest print time out of the group and uses almost the most filament. It looks neat again. It's flexible. You're spending a lot more time printing it, and you're not really buying anything. So to me, at least what I do is, if I'm looking for something in one of the categories, I'm going to look for one of them in that category that I typically use almost all the time. And if I don't really care about how it prints, I just need it to be a standard infill, I'm going to fall back to cubic. That's just what I've been using more recently. I know before I used to use grid. I guess as I learn more, I kind of change what I'm doing as well. Alright, so that's that. Now let's go ahead and jump over to the computer. I'll show you that sheet that I was talking about with the comparisons. I used it, all of the times and filament used was based on the Ender 3 fan cover or duck fan cover that I printed, which is over here. You can't see it now. You were able to see it earlier. But I already had that up, so I kind of just used that as a reference and then just jotted down all the details for each of the infills from there. So before we go ahead and jump over to the computer, make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks. Alright guys, we're here at the computer. I'm using this Ender 3 Pro fan duct cover as an example since I had it up from one of the last videos I did. Really, it's just a point of reference. So let's go ahead and get started here. First thing I wanted to show you is kind of an overview of the infill patterns here, how long it takes to print, the different type, the filament differences, and the strengths. So as I mentioned earlier, the infill is really broken into 4 categories. You got low strength, normal strength, high strength, and flexible. They kind of are what they imply. I mean, you got low strength being your lower strength patterns, normal strength being patterns used for day-to-day type prints, and then your high strength for more of a functional type print. And then flexible if you're looking to print something that's going to require some bending or something along those lines. I would consider that more of an infill pattern if you're printing with nylon or something like that where you're expecting it to be more flexible. But the main reason why I created this chart really quick for you guys was to kind of show you that just because something is marked as low, normal, or high strength doesn't mean that it's going to print slower or faster than other patterns. So if you look here, I think our lowest print time is going to be the flexible one at 6 hours and 38 minutes using 53 grams of filament, with the longest one being another flexible one with 9 hours 15 minutes using 59 grams of filament. So there's a big difference just even in the same category of infill. So if you look back at your normals, you've got your grid, triangle, and trihex. These are all about the same print times, 810, 812, 821, so about the same. I would chop some of that up just to margin of error. I mean, these numbers did come from Cura. But the interesting thing here is like lines is 8 hours and 27 minutes, so it's going to be lower strength, use about the same amount of filament, and take longer to print. Zigzag uses more filament, pretty much weaker as well, and about in the same print time, 8 hours and 13 minutes. So not much of a difference on print time, but you're using more filament and getting something that's going to be weaker overall. Some of your high ones vary significantly as well, like the cubic sub, for example, is just below 8 hours and is considered high strength, which I'll show you some of these infill patterns again in Cura. I showed you the coasters earlier, but you can only get so much on a camera like that. I just wanted to show you an example with it both printed and in Cura since I already had them from a video I was doing before. But most of the time, like let's go over to Cura really quick. If you go to the default for standard quality, it's going to be cubic. Cubic is high strength, uses average filament, and is about average print time. So in most situations, that's going to be fine. I think under some of the longer, or let me see something here. I thought one of them, maybe it was low quality, that had a different infill pattern by default. I thought one of them had grid, but that could have also changed between the versions as well. This is the newest version. It's 461. So I guess the reason while I'm doing this video and bringing all of this up is I want to make sure that you guys understand what these patterns are and that it impacts print time, but just because it's considered flexible or low strength doesn't mean it's going to be quicker to print. In many cases, I mean, it could vary a little bit based on the model. In many cases, just printing with cubic is going to be fine. I used to use grid most of the time, just for simplicity. Before I really dug into this before, I thought that it was a quicker print, but when you actually look at the numbers, it turns out not to be the case. One thing I do like to mention, I like to print with Gyroid a lot if I'm doing any type of videos with it, just because I like how it looks. It does use more filament and take longer. But it is a nice high strength print and it looks cool being printed. So I mean, I guess that doesn't really matter when the finish is on, but if you're doing any type of time-lapse videos or things like that, it just looks cooler. Again, the flexible ones, you're probably going to not really print if you're using PLA. It's really, at least in my opinion, just for like your nylons. And typically I've been staying away from anything that is low strength. It doesn't save you any time and it just gives you a weaker infill. And then I would either typically print with cubic or grid. At least that's what I've been doing more recently for normal type prints, and then going to gyroid if I'm doing a time-lapse video. But again, cubic will give you a better overall print and be stronger than grid, and it takes about the same amount of time and uses the same filament. So it's just really more interesting to me. Let me know what you guys think. What do you typically use? Do you have one that you prefer over others? Do you actually ever use any of the flexible patterns? I haven't really had much exposure to them yet. I just haven't had the need. So I'm just curious what you guys think. All right, so now let's jump over. Let me show you a couple of these really quick. Let me switch this back over to standard quality, which is what I was using before as an example. So I had standard at a 30% infill, just so we can kind of see what's going on here. So I want to show you why like lines and zigzag is considered low strength versus like grid, for example, even though when you're looking at them at first they kind of look the same. All right, so let's get down to about right here. If you zoom in, you can see that it's printing one layer and then it's printing the next one in a different direction right after that. So it's going back and forth, lines in each direction. Zigzag's kind of doing the same thing. Let me just slice this really quick. Only difference is what it's doing here at the edges. It kind of just wraps it around instead of doing a straight line. Don't really use zigzag much. All right, so but going over to grid, I mean, if you look at it from the top, they look the same, as you could see earlier with the coasters. But here's the difference. It's printing all of it every time, so it's going to give you a little bit stronger of an infill. And then going over to cubic, which is another one of the more popular ones, like I was mentioning, it's the default one. You can see how it kind of builds up your layers as it's going and creates multiple diamond patterns. It looks pretty neat when you're actually looking at it. If you're looking at the final print with the top cut off, like on the coasters, but it's also very strong. And then the cubic sub is similar, not much different, at least not to the eye, just slightly different pattern coming up. The triangles are a little bit different. Go into your triangles, it's pretty much going to be what you expect. It's going to be a normal strength print, and it's going to be a bunch of triangles, as you can see here. But it's the same triangle pattern all the way up, it doesn't shift. And then tri-hex kind of shifts a little bit. Here, I mean, it has your hexagon and then your triangles in between it. So it's just a little bit different of a pattern. Theoretically, it would be a little bit stronger, but it's the difference between the two is going to be minimum. Octa, this is one that I don't really use too often. I don't know why. I guess I haven't had a need to, or it doesn't really buy you anything. Some people might like it though, but it is a neat pattern if you're watching it print. As you can see here, it's kind of just doing lines as it goes up, and it just shifts your layers around, which makes it stronger. And then same with this one. So yeah, it pretty much looks the same. With the coasters, you can see the difference printed. It's with the background here, it's kind of hard. You can see each layer, but it's kind of hard to see what it actually looks like once the final product's done. But on the coaster, you were able to see it decently, I thought. Concentric, this is probably going to be the most common of the flexible, just because it's quicker print time. It's following the outside patterns and just building it up. As you can see, there's not much support in between these, which makes it flexible, but it's just following the same pattern, following the perimeter all the way up. Again, it's not a strong print. It's going to be more of a flexible type print. If you have a need for it, great. If not, I don't see you using this for standard prints on a day-to-day type basis, unless you're printing a lot with nylon. The Cross and Cross 3D, I like how they look, but they do take longer to print, and again, they're flexible. So this is just a straight cross pattern all the way up and down, and you can see how it has no connection between these, so it kind of gives you bend marks on those lines. And then with the cross 3D, it's pretty much the same, just with the 3D aspect. You can't really tell here. I guess you can a little bit, but it kind of builds up that 3D shape. It's shifting around. But on the coaster, you can definitely tell the difference here. And then, like I said, Gyroid is the one I like to watch get print the most. Just because it looks cool being printed. It's a very strong infill. It does use a little bit more filament and take more time, but it has your zigzag type lines, and it rotates back and forth on every layer. It just makes for a really neat looking print when you're watching it. I guess when you have the cover on or the top layers are there, it makes no difference either way because you won't be able to see it. It's just a stronger, heavier print. But if you're doing any type of time-lapse videos or trying to show off your printer to your friends or something like that, you'll want to show them this one just because it looks the coolest as it's being printed, at least in my opinion. But that's really everything I wanted to show you here in Cura. Again, we went over the coasters at the beginning, so I kind of broke it down, the categories there, and then went through most of the infill patterns here in Cura. I kind of talked about what they're used for, why. But I'd be curious to know what you guys think. Do you use some of these more than others? Do you not use some, or do you hate any of them in particular? If so, why? Go ahead and leave a comment below. I mean, I'd love to hear from you guys. Alright guys, that covers Cura infill patterns. Pretty much covered the difference between the 4 categories, whether it be your low strength, normal strength, high strength, or flexible. What it looks like with the tops cut off of the actual parts. Went over some of the details in Cura, talked about the print time differences, why it doesn't necessarily make sense to use some of the low infill patterns unless you really have an example or need for it. If you have any questions or have any feedback, please leave a comment below. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.